well, all eyes not just on heaven, but also on the United States with, of course, dramatic election results in the last couple of days. And I've just been talking to Robert Patman about what that means at a political level. But what does it mean for us here in New Zealand, particularly at an economic level? A big spurge in the markets initially, but is that how's that likely to go for us long term? Joining us on the program now from Christian Savings senior lender Andy Milne. Andy, kia ora, good morning.
Hi Andrew, great to be with you.
It's a strange one, isn't it? Because it's not our country. We don't have a horse in the race, but it's going to have a significant impact on us here in New Zealand. I suppose because it's the largest economy in the world. When the US sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold.
Absolutely. And look, it is going to have, you're right. It's the other side of the world. What does it mean for us? Well, quite a lot potentially in an economic sense. You touched on a bit of a bounce in the markets. The markets have responded. There's been a short-term spike in the markets, and then the US dollar has risen slightly, which is depressed other currencies.
Yeah.
But it does have potential consequences for New Zealand, not necessarily great ones in some ways. A lot of Trump's rhetoric prior to the election was quite isolationist, quite protectionist in terms of his economic policies. You'll have heard a lot of talk about tariffs.
Yeah.
So what that means is effectively he's going to slap, it's mainly targeted at China and Mexico,
Yep.
but he's going to slap 60% tariffs on, so he says, on China and Mexico, but 20% across the board for imports from across the world. Now, the US is currently, just after the close of the 23 year, the US now is our second biggest export market, something like $15 billion in trade to exports going to the US. So, potentially quite serious ramifications for our beef and dairy sectors, but also our wine sector as well.
Yeah.
The US is now our biggest export market for our wine industry. So potentially some quite large consequences in terms of our income for New Zealand Inc. As we say, our export receipts could be impacted there.
I mean, it's pretty significant, although this is also, of course, going to impact US consumers. Trump was voted in, some people would say, largely for economic reasons. It looks like everything's going to get more expensive in the United States, or I suppose the intended consequence is everything gets more expensive in the United States apart from US-produced goods. But in terms of supply and demand, that doesn't look like a smooth operation. Things might get a bit more expensive for US consumers as well.
That's right. There is, potential. The aim of these tariffs is to, as you say, make US produced goods more attractive relative to those coming from overseas. But
Yeah.
the fact is the US economy doesn't produce enough yet to make that viable. So in the short term, you're quite correct. That's going to mean for some price shocks for US consumers. In other words, we're talking about inflation.
Yeah.
So price inflation for consumer goods, and that's obviously, as you know, that's had quite, inflation has been the large driver of interest rate rises across the world. So if that leads to inflation in the US, that's possibly going to have economic ramifications across the world and here in New Zealand. So, there is a possibility that's going to slow down, the projected interest rate cuts that we've been talking about for some time now, if not take them off the table altogether, Andrew.
Yeah, and this is something which has been the light on the horizon for a while, particularly for people with mortgages and home loans and those sorts of things going, oh gosh, it looks like it's going to be a slightly brighter Christmas than I thought, and people have been making decisions about, whether to fix or float or how long to lock things in for based on this. But actually, all bets are off, to use my second gambling metaphor of this conversation. Things may not be looking as rosy for mortgage holders as we thought, perhaps.
Well, potentially. I mean, I don't think we're going to see any. any short-term issues, we're still looking. It's too soon to say,
Yeah.
frankly, Andrew. We are looking quite speculative. The markets are still pricing in a potential 50% or 50-point, I should say, basis, 50 basis point cut to the OCR in November. So, look, in the short term, I don't think there's been any massive correction or change to forecasts for interest rates, but long term, it does create an uncertainty. There are bright spots for New Zealand as well. It should be said. If our exports to the US are affected, it does open up potentially even greater relationships with China and potentially Mexico as well. So, it's not all doom and gloom by any measure, but it is something that we should keep quite a close eye on.
And hey, the US isn't our only dance partner when it comes to trade, and there may be positive. Further openings. I know there's been some positive things in India and in the European community in the UK recently as well, and perhaps an opportunity to go a little bit deeper than that, although I don't imagine that the French will be happy to take our wine surplus in the next season. There may be some pushback to that.
Quite likely, yes. You're quite right. So, as you mentioned, we are making positive strides in a trade relationship with India. So there are other options out there, but and that's not to say in the short term that's going to create some disquiet and some uncertainty for our exporters.
Andy, you mentioned that we will be hearing from the Reserve Bank between now and Christmas, so at least some indication on what the future may look like for interest rates. But actually, in this uncertainty is never good for the economy. Uncertainty is never good for people that are just, I suppose, wanting to know how the markets are going to go. Even uncertainty is a bad look for us economically as we head towards Christmas, right?
Well, that's right, Andrew. And I think the markets don't like uncertainty, and I think we may see some short-term volatility through that. But it's too soon to tell with any degree of surety what that might mean for us at this stage. But the talk still is that with the state of our domestic economy and all the indicators that we're seeing, the received wisdom from the various economic commentators in the country is that the Reserve Bank is still heading towards a cut in the short term.
And hey, swings and roundabouts. What may be bad news for people that have got mortgages may be great news for investors, of course, keeping interest rates a little bit higher, and of course encourage people to prayerfully consider investing with Christian Savings. christiansavings.co.nz for more information on that. Andy, thank you for what you do. Thanks for joining us today.
All right, Andrew. Thanks very much.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.